Diolch, Llywydd. At the outset, I'd like to say I've given a minute of my time to Jenny Rathbone, Sianna Williams and Joyce Watson. Time and time again, we have stood and spoken in this chamber to condemn sexual harassment in our communities, in our workplaces and in our country. We have signed up to campaigns, we have supported policies and we have taken part in events. The Welsh Government has rightly legislated, set up working groups and worked together with trade unions and other partners on implementation. But sexual harassment at large in society remains sadly endemic, and we've had to repeatedly respond to systemic issues of sexual harassment within workplaces and across services in Wales. Yes, we have a duty to call out, but to merely condemn is not enough. A corporate commitment or policy position is welcome, but it's no substitution for widespread cultural change. And we have to be afraid too to hold individuals and institutions to account on any hypocrisy. For example, to advocate or be an ambassador for something like the White Ribbon campaign, then whose own or organisational actions fall far short. Today's short debate will set out what sexual harassment in the workplace is, some of the protections currently in place, and hopefully serve in some way as a call to do and to be better. But as someone who became a politician because I was an activist, I want to try and set out some practical steps and suggestions for how we can meaningfully move from talking to tackling sexual harassment at work. Sexual harassment is conduct that is unwanted, meaning it is unwelcome or uninvited behaviour, and the person carrying it out doesn't have the consent or permission to do so from the person that experiences it. Workplace sexual harassment also relates to violations of a professional space and so can extend beyond the feelings of an individual victim. There is also sex-based harassment, unwanted contact that focuses on sex or gender. No one person experiences harassment in the same way as another, but what is a common fact is that it is rooted in power and is often an exploitation of power imbalance. Ultimately, sexual harassment is a disgusting display of power that intimidates, coerces or degrades another person, and from a worker's perspective, it could be someone that is high profile or influential in the context of that workplace or working environment. And in a political environment such as our own, that power imbalance is absolutely and acutely amplified. On that note, whilst I am contributing today in my capacity as MS for Delyn, I do want, as Chair of the Standards of Conduct Committee, to place on record my commitment to strengthen the processes we have in place for dealing with sexual harassment, so to improve confidence and support in our Senedd and all who work within it. Workplace sexual harassment can manifest in different ways. It can be physical, face-to-face, or in digital form, such as WhatsApp messages or posts on social media platforms. And let's be clear, sexual harassment in the workplace does not exist in isolation. It's merely a microcosm and part of a societal misogyny that has for too long and too often been normalised. But it cannot ever be considered low level because for those on the receiving end, it can cause severe trauma and be life-changing. In October 2024, the Worker Protection Act was passed in the UK Parliament and introduced a preventative duty on employers to require them to take all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. It includes the ability for compensation and sexual harassment claims to be increased and also gives the EHRC power to take enforcement action where there is evidence of an organisation failing to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. While this is to be welcomed, and I would expect the public sector in Wales to take full account of this in social partnership, the Act does not go far enough. It does not include cover for a third-party harassment, nor does it actually tackle sexual harassment. So how can we strengthen protections to tackle sexual harassment in Wales, in workplaces in Wales? Policies on prevention are not enough on their own. More needs to be done to actually tackle sexual harassment. An all-Wales sexual harassment policy and approach across the entirety of the public sector, one that is zero tolerance, central to tackling this blight on our society. Ensure that workplaces have comprehensive support frameworks and processes that victims of sexual harassment can finally have confidence in. This should include access to counselling services, legal assistance and confidential reporting mechanisms. Welsh Government could try and explore how to use public procurement and the power of the public purse for the private sector in Wales to also adapt to these practices. And an all-Wales whistleblowing facility that has appropriate resources, expertise and transparency of process and outcome. A hard-hitting public campaign aimed at making sexual harassment in the workplace as taboo as drink driving and that helps consign such behaviours to the dustbin of history. And exploring how devolved powers such as planning and licensing could be used to better protect people from sexual harassment in particular workplaces, for example, in hospitality. And this should take into account the asks of the Unite Union's Get Me Home Safely campaign. We should also recognise that the experience of those from marginalised communities with sexual harassment are often more severe and more complex barriers to reporting and accessing therapy or support. This is something that this institution and our own organisations will need to address alongside the commitment to a more diverse Senedd. Beyond Wales, employment legislation could be amended or introduced to strengthen obligations on dealing with sexual harassment for both employers and employees. There could also be guaranteed facility time for trade union equality reps and members who want to take sexual harassment training and for reps who want to represent workers in cases of sexual harassment. I believe also there is merit in working together to explore the potential of a separate tribunal process for cases of sexual harassment, one that recognises the need for sensitivity and appropriate expertise. Tribunals are currently costly, which acts as an added deterrent. This needs reviewing because it cannot be the case that wealth wins in this respect. And access to employment tribunals can be out of reach for most individuals, and it's through trade unions that justice in this way for many can be accessed. It's the role of trade unions to stand up for workers, and they play a pivotal role in ensuring that workers can do their job safely, free from harassment in a fair and supported environment. Union reps are often the first person to receive disclosures of sexual harassment, and trade unions in the spirit of meaningful social partnership should absolutely be central to shaping the actions to tackle sexual harassment in the workplace. Workers are experts by experience and best placed to shape improvements where they work. All union reps should receive training on how to support and represent members in cases of sexual harassment, and all members are expected to work against a culture that allows sexual harassment. I said at the outset that what happens in a workplace is not in isolation from wider society. And like any workplaces, trade unions are not immune. We only have to look at the more recent headlines of challenges within organisations like the TSSA and at the GMB, which saw the commission of the Monaghan report and further review. That said, though, individual trade unions across the country are stepping up the ante when it comes to stamping out sexual harassment, whether that is through campaigns, action plans, or a zero-tolerance approach. And I want to pay particular tribute to Rhiannon Williams of the Wales TUC, who has developed the Wales TUC toolkit for tackling sexual harassment in the workplace and is leading the way in bringing a range of workplaces on board. This toolkit should be adopted and implemented by every workplace in Wales. However, the stark reality of life is that much of the evidence and experience of women makes clear that no workplace is immune from sexual harassment and inappropriate behaviours, myself included. I won't use the term low level because I dismissed it at the start, but in the grand scheme, this is relatively benign but telling in its example. Very many years ago now, when I was a young and enthusiastic activist, I went to one of my first big conferences. I was at one of those evening events we'd all be familiar with some warm white wine on offer. I was introduced to somebody who was then very senior in the trade union movement. They looked me up and down and said, "Oh, if I was 20 years younger." At the time, I was so fresh to the scene that I didn't know who they were, so I replied with, "If you were 20 years younger, you still wouldn't have a chance." The issue then was that person walked away, but the people around me actually said to me, "I can't believe you said that to him." So fortunately, there are other examples I could lean on since I've stood for election or have been locked deep in my brain for decades. But I've shared what I've today simply because I think it demonstrates that real challenge of cultural change, power dynamics and the attitudes of so-called bystanders, particularly in some of the more politically charged settings. It wasn't just the inappropriate comments of that very senior official, but the reaction of others to me. So in coming to a close, it's important to reflect on our own and others' attitudes as well as action or inaction. That's why any approach to tackling sexual harassment in a work setting is both about prevention and having proper, independent and trusted processes in place, but also, I believe, should incorporate accountability of bystanders and their behaviours. To stand by or to not have proper processes in place, or worse, to suppress or cover up behaviours, is certainly not the right thing to do by the individual who's been on the receiving end, but neither is in the interest of an institution. It does not protect the reputation of that institution, quite the opposite. We should also reflect on and call out where there's been knowledge of individual or individuals' inappropriate behaviour and it's been used as some form of leverage, politically or otherwise, as a means of exerting some sort of control. Saturday will mark International Women's Day, and the theme this year is Accelerate Action. So let's do just that, and accelerate action to tackle sexual harassment in the workplace. A little less conversation, a little more action, please.